Howdy, folks. I'm Caleb, and welcome to Influmensirs, the podcast where we explore influential men and their influence on men and the broader conversation around masculinity as a whole. Today, we will be discussing the recent documentary Inside the Manosphere, created by Louis Theroux. I thought we'd start by describing in brief detail the nature of the documentary. So, Inside the Manosphere is a journalistic documentary all about uncovering the online community known famously as the Manosphere. In the doc, Theroux interviews various members of the supposed Manosphere to understand their messaging, tactics, and influence on young men in particular. Before we continue, is there any more additional info our audience of Influmensirs may need to know before we proceed in unpacking and discussing the content of the doc?
I know typically, Caleb, you have us introduce ourselves. I don't know if that's a portion you wanted to do in this segment as well, or no?
We absolutely should, 100%. Yes. Which of you would like to go first?
Well, you're the host, man. You got to go. You got to lead us off.
Okay, fine. But I want to reject some of this this kind of masculinity that's being broadcast in these spaces. So that's why I wanted to defer. But all right, fine. Bob insists. So, yes, my name is Caleb. I'm a trauma-informed therapist working in Portland, Oregon, and I work a lot with men that are genuinely working on their inner healing and mental health, along with also some work on neurodivergence. So, let's take it to Evan.
Evan, I am a pastor in the Northwest, and I've worked specifically with youth for about the last 10 years, actually. I was just calculating that the other day. So there was a lot that pertained specifically to my vocation in this documentary, but I also work a lot with adults too.
And I'm Robert, or Bob, is probably better. I work in an IT space and kind of a traditional desk job, and I'm also an actor. A lot of this interest for me, though, comes from being a father, recent father, and trying to figure out how I can teach my child to navigate a world that is wrestling with the idea of what it means to be a man. And while my child is my daughter, I feel like it's going to be a relevant conversation for pretty much anyone who's going to be interacting with a man at any given point. So literally anybody on the planet, and ostensibly, will be interacting with a male person at some point.
Yes. There's a lot of dudes walking around in the world, you might say. So
a few, yeah.
Figuring out how to dude may be an important thing, but not like this. So yes, this is a key instance of not how to not dude. So I guess I'm curious. Before we hopped on here, we kind of watched the doc, messaged a little bit back and forth, had some questions to ask. So the way that we're going to kind of orient our discussion today is sort of looking at, the head, the heart, and then what are we going to do about it, right? So the head meaning what's some of the messaging that we're hearing here? What is some of the ways in which we find this, as we've already been pointing, problematic, greedy, all sorts of other things. But then in the heart space, sort of exploring a little bit, what about this packaging, what about this messaging is really tapping into pain, I think, that a lot of boys and young men are experiencing and obviously harnessing in all the wrong ways. And then the last one being, okay, cool. So what in the heck are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. So just sort of asking amongst ourselves, what is this going to look like? Is this going to be conversations that we have with, younger boys and younger men in our corners? Is it going to be sort of telling them to be weary of content that promises this or promises that? But yeah, regardless, I thought I would kind of turn it over to you guys if you want to pick up on any of those threads and sort of pose a question to us, and then we'll just launch right into it.
Maybe I'll just start by saying how I felt watching the documentary. I was familiar with the Manosphere and like a lot of the Andrew Tate stuff that had been going around for a while. And we've touched on Jordan Peterson on this podcast before, which is similar masculinity crisis type stuff. I like the only word that kind of sat on my mind as I was watching. I was just very sad. It was like a lot of lament that this, and maybe mostly because I saw so many teen boys coming up to these guys on the streets and being like, dude, you changed my life. You're such a big inspiration. And I'm like, man, there's something way better out there for you. So yeah, it was hard to watch in a lot of ways.
Very much so. I'll echo that. I think that was something that did strike me a lot. The point that some of the kids that came up and were talking to these men were so young that they had to blur their faces so that they couldn't be recognized in the documentary. That says a lot. That we're at a point where it's sometimes faster for a young person to open up their phone and like search for a topic than it is to walk down the hall and ask their parents for advice, or, if they were in person more with their friends, which is getting, I don't know. And I don't want it to sound like I'm a tech alarmist, but it gets to the point that we have, I think from the time that I was growing up, lost a lot of those spaces where you were just going and hanging out, even if it was hanging out to play Halo, that you network together on 3 different TVs in your friend's basement.
Good old days.
But it was still face to face for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that thread of the sadness and in some ways how it's tied to isolation. What was really striking for me, so like we've been saying, pretty much all these dudes, as Frank would say, and he said a lot in the Jordan Peterson pod, and any time on the pod that he's talked about Manosphere, he uses this term, grifters. Yes, 100%. Like, call a spade a spade. This is all just a grift. The one thing that I feel like I would hear a lot of these guys say that I feel like they believe to their core and wasn't a grift is this idea of men being born without value. That was something that, immediately when you said, Evan, that I felt sad. That to me is like sad exclamation point, right? Like just instantly assuming that the only way I'm going to be seen as having any merit at all is through what I do, right? And this is a concept that I'm sure all 3 of us have felt from time to time, right? It's sort of a covert notion within average masculine spaces, right? If it's, a space where the dudes are progressive or conservative, it doesn't matter. That still tends to be the water that we're swimming in. But the directness that they described it just hit me a lot.
What might be even worse is that they're telling young men, hey, the world tells you you're born without value. They're like using this starting point. But if it's all a sales tactic, like, I don't know if they even believe that. Or if they're just saying, hey, here's this thought out here. It's not even true whether you're born with it or without it. But I'm going to use this to get you hooked into this business. That's like almost even worse.
I think something that's struck me about that, and I tend to come down on Caleb's side of that observation, where I do think that they may fervently hold that belief. And this effort started as a way to seek that external validation and kind of carve out a portion of, like, carve out what they felt was a place in the world where they could do something meaningful. I think it's interesting to me that Justin had a successful business, a construction business, before kind of starting in this like influencer path. And so he's a bit of a standout in that regard. At least the others seem to have kind of just come up through this notion of promoting this image of masculinity and not necessarily even really possessing it. And I think something that strikes me too is, not even more so than the young boys coming up and talking to them, were the clips that Justin Theroux, Louis Theroux. Justin Theroux is his cousin who does acting things. That Louis showed clips of them as young boys, doing
Yeah.
like the marshmallow challenge. Was it Myron doing the marshmallow challenge? And then I think he had Ben, I think was the other young like clip he showed of this young kid. But it's like, these are young men. These are men who kind of came up with access to these platforms. And so got started on it in an early way and then like saw it as like a viable path forward for work. There's, I think, a lot to unpack from I'm curious, Caleb, and we can maybe get into this at a later time. They went into the sort of traumatic upbringings that a lot of these young men had, and Louis made the observation that I think was spot on, that it's them projecting the consequences of their trauma out to a wider audience and sort of propagating it further.
Yes.
And I don't know if you have psychiatry related insight or psychology related insights and terminology you can throw out in that regard, as this is the thing that I'm coming here as the person with like the least exposure to the manosphere. Like, y'all have the interest in this project from like having encountered these folks before. I have no idea what any of these names were, who any of these people were. I've been sort of blissfully unaware of this subculture, knowing it exists, but not knowing the particulars of it. Like, there are some names that I have encountered before, but for the most part, Caleb, you can attest this. You text our group about what we want to cover next, and I'm like, I have no idea who that person is. Like, sure, we can talk about them, but that's just this vision of, the way that it's been shaped. Like, I don't know. I should count my lucky stars, I suppose, that I've avoided being pulled down to that route. But here I am. Now you're dragging him into it. So thank you for that, Caleb. Thank you for subjecting me to this.
Well, I could go all the, in some ways, a high road route, and kind of not make you feel bad or feel worse, but more like what we've been talking about is sort of like, in some ways, I feel like I've had exposure to it, not in a similar kind of indirect manner, but more because I grew up in more of a conservative culture and context. So some of those friends, some of those people still in those spaces, they may not be caught up in the manosphere, right? They're probably, in fact, most of the guys that I know are just normal, blue collar, conservative guys that if we have a conversation, I might say, hey, dude, that's a little racist. And he'd be like, no, it's not. And then, then we just kind of go back and forth, but it's not quite to this, this intensity. But it feels like we sort of just have to figure out amongst ourselves, what are we going to do with the young teens and essentially this young generation that's just inundated with this stuff, right? Because that was another portion that he talked about. It's just this algorithm prison that a lot of these guys are finding themselves in, even the ones that have become the grifters, right? The HS, right? The Sneeko, I think was his name.
Mhm.
That, I guess to the trauma of it all, because yes, I'm the resident therapist. Tell me how you feel. I think that it really is something as simple as fatherlessness. I mean, and he talks about it, and it's not that shocking.
Didn't they
It's not.
all the main guys grow up without a father?
I'm pretty sure every single one did. So, obviously, in some ways, um, it can be hard to determine what's worse, an absent dad or a shit dad. But just in some ways, to have this exposure where all of these guys, it was absent, that's sort of where I think a lot of the posturing kind of, it blossoms in that vacuum because of the absence that you feel. I mean, this is something that with a lot of the male clients that I work with, right? I keep seeing over and over, and maybe Evan, you experience this as well, even with, some of the kids that you work with reasonably good parents. But if they're in situations where they're not necessarily having male role models instill confidence in them, they're kind of going to potentially have a direct through line to this algorithm and could be caught up in it.
Yeah, I think I've referred to the book of Men and Boys by Richard Reeves before, which I've sort of taken as my starting point for the conversations that I'm having here. And he talks a lot about how a failure to talk about men's issues, or especially in progressive spaces, has actually seeded a battleground. And I think we're seeing the consequences of that pretty seriously with regards to the gravitation of like which political parties a lot of these young men are gravitating towards, the messages and figures that these individuals are latching onto are coming into a place where they feel are disadvantaged. And I'm just looking at the U.S. Labor Bureau's statistics, and over the last, like 6 months, with the exception of October, there's not data for October. And many times it's nearly 1 in 10 men ages 20 to 24 years are unemployed. And that's a kind of the prime age where you'll be leaving your education and joining the workforce. And so we're seeing a situation where we've got underemployed or unemployed men who are not being compensated well for their time and feel that they're being taken advantage of. And to be honest, that's the other piece of this message, the reason that I think there's that nugget of truth in some of the messaging that these influencers are putting out there, these shillers, these grifters are able to make the case because they see that people are not being afforded the traditional opportunities. The promise that was given to them was kind of all a lie. Go to work or go to school, graduate, get a job, and you'll be able to afford a house. You'll be able to get married. You'll be able to have kids. You'll be able to, kind of go down this route. And none of that has materialized, or that has either not materialized or has been delayed well beyond what the traditional milestones for those were. We just bought our first place, and I just turned 40, and I've been working in jobs where I make 6 figures a year for the last 12, 13 years. And just because of the cost of living and 2 moments of being unemployed because there were positions that just disappeared. Like I wasn't able to afford, we had to like go through all our savings to afford rent. And I'm extremely advantaged. Like I don't have $30 million in a Lambo, and that's not success. No, I don't want you to think that's success. But I don't think we're doing poorly for ourselves. And I never felt that we were, but God, it's hard. And I can only imagine. I walked past a woman in Costco today, and she had, and it's like one of those things where you just feel so deeply for someone that this would probably be my only encounter with this person. She had a cart full of stuff, and she's standing there looking at the account balance on her phone, and it's like saying that there was no funds in her account. And it's like she had this look of just distress on her face. And it's like, I don't know what I could do to, like, first it would be weird to be like, wow, that sucks. I'm so sorry you're going through that. Because it's like, I've net admitted that I saw what she's looking at. But it's like, that's everywhere right now. And I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon. And that's going to continue to accelerate the appeal of messaging like this if we don't have a viable alternative in some way, or make concerted efforts as a society to course correct. And the problem is right now we have people in positions of power who are sort of reinforcing this idea of like, oh yeah, we ought to get women back into doing more domestic things, and men need to be responsible for earning a living. So what if we're underpaying you? That's your fault. You need to get better skills. That's the message that's out there right now. So like, I don't blame people for looking for an alternative, but the thing is, it's like they gang up, but they don't join together. And that's the issue. You see them pick a target, they gang up and they point their finger at it and they punch down, but they don't band together. It's like if we band together and we realize that we are like stronger as a unit, and that we can maybe go after the systems that are keeping us in these positions. You want to talk about breaking out of the matrix? That's what we should be talking about. But I'm also, probably going to get called a wacko Marxist socialist for that ideology, but here I am.
I was going to say that, or it sounds a little bit like a speech from that show that you really like, Andor, when
Oh, yeah.
Mon Mothma.
What do I sacrifice? Everything.
Yes. Well, kind of what I was going to say to your point is like, I'm going to paint with a very broad brush. I'm going to generalize somewhat, but the issue has kind of distilled down to the progressive side has legitimized the pain and suffering of women, and in the process delegitimized the pain and suffering of men.
Yes.
And then it's the opposite on the other side. So then we have this war of the sexes where everyone loses. Like literally everyone loses. There was the moment where Louis interviews the two guys that really, said, "Oh, Justin, I really appreciate, all that you've done, all that kind of stuff." And I was just really struck by the way in which, on the one hand, he took Justin's philosophy about, nutting the F up and, be a man and blah, 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 all that kind of gumption, right? That kind of like tough love rhetoric. And at the same time, just sort of glossed over, oh, yeah, I was living in my car. Oh, yeah, my brother took his life. Oh, yeah. And it's just like, wow. There's just no room for us to grieve, to change, like Bob was saying. It's just such a striking moment.
Yeah. I think something I appreciated about this, and maybe other people saw it differently, and sorry, Evan, I'll give you a chance to talk in a minute, I suppose.
It's all good.
Is that I think Louis Theroux didn't have any ill will towards any of these people, really. Like, I think he was taken aback or like, and definitely like knew to call out the most ridiculous elements of it. But I think it was like, there's this part of me that read his efforts here, especially by including those clips of some of these influencers as children, of saying like, look, you can course correct, you can use your platform for something better than what you're using it for. And I think that was, I think it was him trying to take them to task and like man up in a different way. Is the way that I kind of read what his motivation may have been for this, in addition to understanding and just kind of shining a light on it. But I have more thoughts about these things. Evan, I bet you have thoughts. I'm curious what your take on all of this is as a pastor, because I know a lot of what you do is probably focused on helping people find something outside of themselves to look forward to. And I imagine you take a slightly different tack than, talking about OnlyFans and Lamborghinis.
Yeah, don't quite sell the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. I'd never watched a full documentary of Louis, but I've seen him all over the place. So I wasn't super familiar with how he did stuff. But I did note, I was like, wow, this looks like really good journalism, just from the standpoint that he's kind of just here talking to these guys. I think there was one time where he started to get a little involved in it when he was on that podcast with all the girls and the one guy, and he like wanted to kind of start going at it with them, which would have been pretty good. But other than that, he kind of was just like talking to them, hearing about their lives and all that stuff.
Yeah. Something that stuck out to me from that particular encounter, and we've kind of got around to this a little bit, where we're talking about the way that they're selling this value that you have as a man, if you're born with no value. And he said, Louis had a really amazing quote there that I actually wrote in its entirety, where he said that he found it reductive, and that it was kind of a worldview where women and men are only as good as their various stats: money, height, body count. And I think that was a really great way to get at it. And in a way, it's that notion that it's like, what are you going to do when like you can't lift or work out the gym as much as you used to, man? Like, what are you going to do when your hair starts to go gray, or like, your knee gives out, or one investment just doesn't go the way you want it to, man. And like, it's weird. I think a lot of it comes from this scarcity mindset for me. And this is where we're getting into that heart element of it, where it's like, this is all about, and you could see it on display even with this, like, oh, devil may care, like, I can have a million women. That's like, yeah, I've got this one-sided monogamy. And you saw that both with Myron and Justin, where they were talking about, oh yeah, they're these women, but like, I can have all these other women that I want. And then by the end of it, Myron's girlfriend has left him. And it's like, how much control does that show that you really have? Like, she's walking out of this circumstance, like, and that points out what an illusion that is, among other things. And good for her for getting out, frankly. And good on you, Angie. And then Justin's wife, and you could tell she was like a little bit more on board. Like, she seemed a little more on board with the whole idea, until he said, if this were over tomorrow, I would still have had this time. And then you saw in her eyes that recognition, like, what do you, like, does this mean he's thinking about that regularly? Over tomorrow? What do you mean? Like, I thought this was kind of a committed long-term circumstance. And that was after Louis kind of challenged him on why not make it official in the eyes of the state? Is it about money? It's like, it doesn't seem very secure for you, to his wife. And I found that very interesting to me, that it is all about hanging on to as much as you can because it may all disappear. And there's that recognition I think they have deep down, that it's like, even, that it's that kind of control is so rooted in a desperate, going back to Andor, Nemec, a character in that show, says the need to control is so unnatural. Like, that's why it leaks, power breaks. That's what we're seeing on display here. It works. It's on the macro scale. It's on the micro scale. It's the same concept at work. Gosh, that show is good writing. When are we doing that show?
I don't know, man. You got to lead it. You got to host it, and we'll do it when you want to do it.
I can bring people in to talk about it too, because I have friends everywhere. So.
Oh yeah. I have a thought. Unless Evan, do you want to pick up on what he said? I have one of the questions I want to ask, but
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna, because we're veering into that heart-oriented territory. I was sort of curious, like, what do we think that Louis is trying to unpack, or maybe even the men interviewed are trying to say about brotherhood as a whole. So the reason I'm asking that is that notion that I kind of had first hinted out of, like, you're only worth your value, which that is externalized, right? And then Bob sort of pointing out, and then once it's externalized, then you got to protect it, right? Then this hoarding instinct, this scarcity mindset kind of takes over. The question I have then is, what do we think that this messaging is sort of communicating to boys that are caught in this algorithm prison, that are not spending time with their, oddly enough, I mean, a lot of the instances, it was a whole swarm of boys that were all meeting the influencers. So maybe that's a space where they're making these friends. But even there, right, like, what is that informing about this experience of brotherhood, right, that all three of us had, right? Whether it was through our literal siblings that we had growing up, whether it was sort of the brotherhood attachments that we formed with close friends in those adolescent years, and how vital they are, right? What do we think the Manosphere is sort of saying, or maybe I'm kind of thinking not saying, about what it means to be a brother to your fellow man?
I
had a lot, it seems.
I had a sister, so I'm waiting and holding space. Where like, for those who had brothers or have brothers growing up.
Yeah, I only had a sister.
Yeah.
So
yes,
I can pitch in a little bit then, because all of my brotherhood had to be a kind of found brotherhood, and a lot of, to be honest, like some of my closest friends are still the guys I knew when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. those friends that I made then are the ones that I, talk to the most often. And with a couple of exceptions, Caleb, we met, when I was 1 foot in the grave already and on my way over the hill. That's great. So thanks for my late life friendship. I appreciate it. I think what it points out to me is just how desperate for connection we are. We're a social species. And the other thing is, and this is going to be less charitable, it points out that despite all our advancements, we're still primates, man. Like, we gravitate towards these figures more than we do these ideologies. And like, belonging in a group is an essential element for our survival. And so when you feel like you don't belong in the group of origin that you came from, like, you gotta check out and go find something else that you think is going to give you a place. And it's so unfortunate that these young men have been duped by technology, by the people that are spouting these ideas, into thinking that this is the place where they belong, and that there's no other spot for them. Because what is so strange to me is, as you pointed out, it is large groups of them. So clearly they've found community. But gosh, if I'm not disheartened by the kinds of things that they're excited about talking about and doing within that community space. And that being said, having grown up male in America in the time period was the beginning of the internet, like, not all of my friends were into and doing savory things all the time. And you kind of encounter those circumstances where you're running into that problem, but it wasn't algorithmically enforced. It was so easy to walk away and unplug if I found myself in a situation I didn't really enjoy. And I don't think that's as easy now, because we live in an always on time where it's just at elbow's reach. And so that's heartbreaking to me. But I think the thing we need to take away from it is that it's very possible to invite young men and boys into these spaces where there is community, and there are opportunities to find ways to foster and mentor them. It shows a vacuum of mentorship as well, because it's like they've latched onto this mentor because there isn't necessarily a mentor close enough to them, possibly, that is able to take that space and fill it and kind of speak into their lives in a more positive way. But I have hope that it can be course corrected. And I think some of it's going to come down to legislation and pushes to restrict access to these apps. And like, not to say that I'm a fan of censorship, but I am a fan of like removing a harmful substance from the hands of someone who doesn't have the well-developed prefrontal cortex to resist reaching for that harmful substance when they feel that it gives them the right kind of dopamine hit.
Yeah, I think you said in the beginning there, belonging is kind of one of the key words for a lot of these guys. And as teens and people in general are kind of forced more into isolation, just living online, then obviously things like this are going to really, really take off and capture someone right away. Because I guarantee that's the majority of the way most of people find these guys. It's their whole business is just Instagram and social media. And I think the hope that it would die off is maybe true, just in the sense that any ideology, since an ideology is based on a half-truth, any ideology that doesn't work will die off eventually anyways. We've seen that happen throughout time. One that doesn't provide someone with a meaningful alternative just doesn't last. The one thing that I think Sneeko said that I was most concerned for the future about was when he said that most of these guys are all in politics now.
Yeah, that freaked me out. Ooh. Yeah, we graduated. We're all, yeah. I was like, oh, scary. Great. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Guess it's time for me to look at running for office, I suppose.
Got my vote.
Oh, no, I don't know about that, man. I'm not entirely sure I'd vote for myself. I vote for Frank.
If you quote Andor on your campaign, then.
Yeah, man. I have my Andor ring. I'm not wearing it today. I'll bring it next time.
I mean, should we determine whether and/or would he consume this kind of content, we think, or would he break free from it?
I think he'd take a more violent counter stance to it, if I'm being honest, based on the nature of the show. Not endorsing that, just speaking to the nature of that character.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. What about Evan? Did you have any either to pivot to a different kind of question, right? Like a different topic, or just to give you an opportunity to pose something to us out here.
I guess maybe related to kind of what I just mentioned. It seemed pretty obvious that it was the Republican Party that is targeting these guys, and led by some pretty big foundations like Turning Point and obviously Charlie Kirk, and everything that happened last year probably accelerated a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I wrote down was just, what does this say about the future of political discourse and representation? Like, what should we expect these next runners up, or like, will they even make it very, far? I don't know. I'm not great at predicting politics at all. I'm not super well involved with it, but I don't know. It's concerning.
I have a feeling we'll see a lot more people like this in office in the coming 4 to 6 years. And I have a feeling that the sort of orthodoxy, like this kind of fundamentalist view of things that they're promoting, is going to continue to have a platform. I don't necessarily know if it will continue to be the mainstream, but the truth is, and the unfortunate thing is, that you get enough disenfranchised, able-bodied, radicalized young men into a circumstance where they're feeling that they're being deprived of something meaningful, and point them towards something that you tell them is meaningful and they believe you, they tend to latch onto it, and it doesn't end well usually. So I have concerns that this is only going to get a bit stronger for the near term, which is why it's all the more important to find alternatives to present and make them very appealing.
Agreed. This is a bit of a shameless plug for the pod itself, because we did a whole episode around a fellow that kind of fits this bill. He is not actively running for political office, but Hassan Piker is like a really, really big Twitch streamer, and it's kind of they call him the Joe Rogan of the left. Kind of has a lot of these Manosphere trappings, really, really ripped, good looking guy, charismatic, he's got the riz, but is very much more endorsing ideology that's leftist, right? Ideology that is counter to sort of the reductionistic conservatism. I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I miss Hank Hill. I miss like average ass conservatives. Like normal human beings, like just average Clint Eastwood, please just get off my lawn kind of energy. I don't need any of this drivel from the right anymore. Like it's so deeply tainted. And I think that the way in which, in some ways, the church has kind of become co-opted within it. I think that's kind of been my ire for so long, in just the frustration of, obviously it became more obvious in 2016, but this sort of phenomenon has been happening for quite a bit longer. Plug Jesus and John Wayne. I always tell people to please read that book, Jesus
Great
and
book.
John Wayne.
Very good book.
But just this idea of, there are good conservative people out there. There are good conservative Christian people out there. I know many of them, and they are kind and conscientious. And again, hold to policy in a way that, again, coming from a more, like, I'll own it, I'll admit it, I'm a little bit more on the progressive side. But they can just, the way in which these figureheads have just so deeply derailed and stamped out any of that honest conservatism that I grew up with. This is my rant moment. This is what, engagement, because she's getting mad, engagement. This is that moment. But I don't know. I think just watching the doc, it's something that I think that we've talked about and kind of wrestled with on and off, but in some ways, I don't know. I know it's beating a dead horse, but it bears repeating. It's just, when can we get normal again? Is normal even possible? And I know it's not, but yeah.
Was there ever a normal, my man? Or were these things just less obvious because there wasn't an internet with an algorithm feeding them to you? That's the other element.
What I will say, though, in response to that is there is something about, and you were mentioning it, right, that in some ways we have to turn our attention to tech, right? And maybe this is where the heady question or the actionable question kind of emerges here. But I think while there was always discontent and a political fracturing at the center of the United States and just the West in general for a long time, I'm not saying there wasn't. There is something about the way that the algorithms have fueled it with such intensity that has been so rampantly unchecked to get to this manosphere, right? Like, this didn't just happen overnight. It was felt overnight, but the building blocks of it were here for a long time. And so I guess, I suppose I'm putting this question out there. What do we think as far as actionable things, kind of per what Thoreau's talking about in the doc, and kind of is it about limiting access for young boys and men to this kind of material? Is it a simple, kind of a churchy notion I'm coming up with, an altar call, all hands on deck, good-natured men out there, please, like, contact and mentor boys near you. I mean, Bob and I, we've talked about with of Boys and Men, Richard Reeves just kind of talking about, like, that there's so many big sisters. Right, Bob. Didn't you talk about this? There's so many big sisters, which is excellent, right? I'm not saying I don't want that. That's incredible that those resources are available for a lot of young girls. There's not that for young boys. So, yeah, I guess begging the question: what do we do? What do we do about this reality that we're in?
Yeah, well, men stepping up to be good role models for the other young boys in their life, I think, is maybe one of the easiest places that any person could start from, because you have most likely someone in your life that you could try and model what a better alternative looks like to them, as opposed to maybe higher policy governmental things that just feel out of reach sometimes. Like, where can you start in your actual location in the community you have? Like, what's the one person in your life that you can make a difference for? And even just, I mean, being aware of this stuff is kind of a great start so that you can know the language. I mean, that's part of why I keep my ear online, even though I don't like online that much. That's why I keep it online, is because when I hear the youth that I work with talking about things and certain language comes up, I can recognize it and I can speak into it in the spaces that I have available. So there's that. There's also policy stuff and voting. I mean, Sneeko was banned, I think it said, from many platforms that he was on, but recently allowed back on YouTube. So there's a discussion over, is this beyond free speech? I would say yes, because it's harmful and it's propagating a lot of harmful stuff. So there's
And
both of those for
misinformation.
sure.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that I would say that legislative solutions aren't necessarily entirely out of reach. There are there are circumstances where enough states enact a change that a company is forced to kind of comply with it broadly because it's difficult to do different things for different locales.
Yeah.
So like taking steps to limit, raise the age at which children are allowed to have social media accounts is one meaningful thing. And there's several pundits have talked about that. And I do think that that's sensible. And I don't think it's too, I don't think it's too far beyond the pale. Antitrust legislation for a lot of these things would also go a long way, but that's definitely, I would say at the moment, that's out of reach. I don't think that that's forever out of reach, but it is going to take a while to have the right circumstances in place that we had when Lena Khan was running all the antitrust lawsuits over the last few years. But I do think that the best things you can do, and I want to echo both of your points, are all the things you can do locally. It is like if you live in a neighborhood where you have a neighbor who's seeming out of touch or like doesn't seem to have a way to connect, like, that can be an opportunity for you to reach out. Or going through, probably a better path is going through something like Big Brother, Big Sister, or the Boys and Girls Club, and helping out in those ways. And this is the part where if anybody gets hold of this, they'll start talking about us being pedophiles because they recommend you hang out with young men. But that's part of the problem. It's just that like it becomes difficult for a grown person to take an inch. It's seen as unhealthy. And actually Richard Reeves talks about this as well. And so does, oh gosh, what's his name? He's bald. He's a professor at NYU. Scott Galloway, Professor Galloway. He talks about that as well, that it's like seen as unhealthy for an older person to take an interest in a young person's life that they're not related to, because it's like, oh, you must be a pedo. And it's like, admittedly, the evidence is out there that there are a lot of pedos hanging out. So it is one of the barriers to that. And that's so unfortunate. We're such a stronger society when we have the opportunity to actively cooperate as a community. And I think focusing, this is going to sound crazy, but focusing on things like walkability, like making it so you can walk to a store and encounter people you might not otherwise encounter, or take a bus or a train somewhere, as opposed to getting in your car, putting on your podcast or the same 15 songs you listen
Except
to all
this
the time.
one.
No, even this one. Just don't listen to us while you're walking, guys. Enjoy the fresh air. Listen to the birds. It's just see if there's water running nearby. Figure out if that high-pitched whine is indeed a Tesla driving by that might be about to turn into you because the person is busy scrolling through something on the giant iPad bolted to the dash. There are, I think, those things that you can do locally, and going to events, going to book signings, things like that, finding those opportunities, or like, starting a podcast that's trying to punch back against this a little bit. It's another thing you can do if you're so inclined. But it's not going to fix itself. We have to take an active interest in it, and we have to make it normal to take an active interest in it.
Yeah, I think that normalcy is really, really huge, right? And again, that's what I appreciate about Reeves' work and Galloway's work, and a lot of men and women that are actively involved in the plight and the suffering of men, and kind of how enabling men in their 30s and over to just sort of invest in the coming generations more and more. One big thing that kind of feels like is something that we've all been hinting at is sort of just a giant denouncing of all things Manosphere, and I feel like Louis Theroux was sort of hinting at this as well, is we are, and Bob was saying it as well, we are communal. We are at our best as a collective. And now I'm going to sound Marxist. We are designed to be connected with each other, to know about each other's plights, about each other's struggles, this weird ass, I'm going to externalize all of my value. I'm just going to nut up or shut up, and I'm going to make X amount of dollars. We're not designed to do that at our core. There's no flourishing there. There's no fulfillment there. It's all empty. And I think that as far as how communities can form, like anything that is, kind of to both of y'all's point, like it's walkable, it's a local congregation, right? It's a local community center. It's whatever these spaces may be, that's really important. But also just in some ways, we do know that, the tech world that we live in is going to keep on teching and keep on growing and keep on building. So in some ways, finding those positive tech communal spaces, right? That's one of the big goals here, right? Is, inviting you guys on and everyone else that I've had on. I like and respect you guys. That's why I want to have conversations with y'all. That's why I want to be in community with y'all, right? It's a different form, and it's never going to replace in-person community. But we all know that at some level, online spaces are had, right? Online connectivity is going to be a thing. So if you're going to be connected with other people in an online space, make it a good one. Make it a healthy one, right? There's nothing, I was just a random personal tangent, but I was just reflecting on my wife earlier this week, how I've had a lot of positive online connection through online gaming, right? A lot of dudes that I've met on there that I would consider legitimate friends. And again, it's never going to replace in-person community. These conversations, I love them so much. That's why I started this freaking thing. It's never going to replace online in-person community. But I think as much community as we can get, I think that's what we teach to our boys. Whatever is healthy, whatever is good. I mean, Evan, oh man, I'm almost quoting that verse and I didn't even do it on purpose. Philippians. It just feels like that's sort of so much of all the things in the doc. It's just, Thoreau talked about it. You're just not catering. What's the word? Placating to people's worst intentions, their worst qualities, as opposed to what we're wanting to do here, what you're wanting to do as a pastor, what I'm wanting to do as a therapist, the work that you do, Bob. We want to generate spaces that are healthy, that make people smile, that make people feel joy. That's very manly. Very, very manly.
Yeah, it is.
Right. Well, any other either final thoughts or maybe even just to touch on a little bit of how any of this stuff hits you personally, right? Obviously, we're grown-ass men, so thankfully, a lot of these algorithms are not tainting us to the same degree as a lot of these more impressionable boys. But yeah, guess just the floor is open for anything on the more personal side.
I mean, I couldn't help but I recommended a friend watch this documentary too, but I had to give him the content warning of like, it's obvious that there's a heavy pornographic side that's attracting these young men too.
Yeah.
And that's already such a
100%.
problem. It's
Yeah.
already something that I'm open about and talk to young men about. But the fact that that's one more key to what draws these guys in. That makes it all the more sinister. And like, I can't look at that podcast with one or two guys and 8 women or whatever sitting around a table and not like, you can't look at that and be like, what? There's something wrong with this. Like, what is not besides the obvious things that they're like berating them and making fun of them,
Yeah.
but they're being paraded based off of their external value, which is what these guys say. It's like, it's just a whole different side of it that's just so alarming and disheartening.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's that I think that's one of the things that's part of the lie about this too, is it's pushing this idea that it's like you can only, and I mean, it's going to sound a little crass, you can only have sex with a woman if you behave this way. and hold these values, is the falsehood that they're presenting. I want to say from experience that is not true. You don't have to behave this way to have that kind of intimate relationship. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not a prerequisite, and it's a huge turnoff most of the time. It's not going to get you. It's not going to be a recipe for long-term success. You don't have to behave this way to get money. You don't have to behave this way to have friends. Like, it's all a huge lie of people who want to sell something to you. And so it really gets me to I think the thing I took away from it, and like I'd written this down in the notes, and I'm so glad that Louis Theroux brought around to it when he's talking about, the mention, all these guys, Justin and Ed and Myron and all of them, they're talking about this idea of the Matrix, but he brought it to the idea that it's like, this is really the Matrix. This is what they're trapped in. Like they've ended up in this false community. They've ended up in this circumstance where they have a parasocial relationship with these individuals and with their members of that community as well. But it's one of those things that's also very funny to me, because like the story of the Matrix was written by two trans women, and so they're latching onto this metaphor that's been kind of talked about by Lily Wachowski, one of the creators, as this metaphor for coming out and recognizing her trans identity. It's like the whole story is like Matrix, Neo breaking out of this binary of like, you're either plugged in or you're in the, like, you're plugged in and kind of deluded, and it's sort of breaking free of the constraints that are on him. But it was like a metaphor that she and her sister were writing as they were going through their own personal struggles. And the culmination of that was the recognition of their gender identity being different. And it's fascinating to me that like they're still using this metaphor even with their blatant, frequent homophobic, anti-trans, there's only two genders ideology, which is just, I'll say it's funny. It's very amusing to me. But it's also like, I'm troubled. It's like, I want to pull the plug on as many of these folks as I can. Like, and then it's like, oh man, then you become someone trying to do the exact same thing that the other people are doing, but in a different way.
I think pulling the plug is kind of the good thing.
Yeah.
My hope walking away was like, well, I hope this documentary is just very successful.
Yeah, it's still in the top 10 in the US on Netflix. So
sorry to cut you off, Caleb.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, to your point, like, parents are watching Netflix. This might be that kind of wake up call. This is another show or story that we should cover at some point, but adolescence. Whoa. That is all about kind of a young boy caught in these spaces who does some less than savory things, and it's sort of following his story.
Oh,
it's excellent.
Yes.
I can't more highly recommend it if I tried. It does the one shot thing. It's kind of a gimmick, but it's kind of cool. But anyway, I guess one last thought that I have, and I can wrap here unless there's more that you guys want to say, but I think at the end of the day, I'm left almost where we started, where it's the sadness of it all. Like, for all of these guys, there is that deep and palpable sadness that I think all three of us men here, right? We're not perfect. We're maturing. We're growing. We're constantly, molding and changing ourselves for the good of the people around us, especially our spouses, especially the women in our lives. But I'm kind of wanting to focus on, how can I have compassion for the boys caught in this? And as much as I kind of don't want to, compassion for the grifters that perhaps in some way or another found themselves caught in it. I mean, Andrew Tate had that moment where he said, I learned a lot when my dad beat me for the first time, right? we don't like that guy and we don't like what he has to spout, but he kind of told us about what his life has been like. So a part of me is sort of, how can I have compassion for these men that are stuck in this? And at the same time, operate this space, my practice, Evan, at your church, and other spaces like this in a way that is still counter to these narratives. We can strongly denounce this ideology. We can still uplift the humanity in these men that are denying it in themselves and in the boys that they're speaking to.
And the women that they exploit as well.
Yes. And the women that they exploit. 100%.
Yeah. I think that's something we didn't speak to at this point too. And you alluded to it, Evan, which is, if you're a parent, check in with your kids.
Yes.
And if you find out that they're struggling with something like this, be curious, be gentle, and be firm. This is you don't want to crush the eggshell, man. But you gotta protect them. You gotta make sure that they fully understand how damaging this worldview is.
Yeah. The only other, it's sort of just reinforcing it again, but for any men that found themselves listening to this kind, to that kind of content for a while, maybe started watching the doc, opened their eyes to certain things, or maybe you found yourself exposed to this, I'm not sure. But if you are struggling, we want to see you. We want to really see you. You have value. And it's not externalized. You just have value for being a human being. Oh. That's all I got. Anything
Agreed.
else?
Yeah. No, it's been great talking with you guys. We're kind of at that point, and I mentioned the packing I need to do, so I need to go be a simp for my wife and lift some heavy boxes and pack some stuff up and maybe take out some dirty diapers. Also, don't be so dainty that you can't change a diaper. What is that dainty nonsense?
Ready.
I might get my suit dirty. I'm so sorry. I don't touch that. Whoa, man. Man up. Change a damn diaper.
Someone changed yours when you were young.
Sure did.
Yeah. All right.
All right, fam. See ya. Hey, y'all. Caleb here. Thank you for listening to our show today. Please like and subscribe wherever the heck you listen to pods. And make sure to follow us on all the socials at Influ-Men-Sirs. That is INFLU-men-Sirs. We'll see you next time. Peace.